Hi, I'm Bronwyn Murphy, and I am the Inclusion Coordinator here at University Covenant Church in Davis, California. I also serve alongside those in the Pacific Southwest Conference of the Evangelical Covenant Church, supporting and equipping lay leaders and ministry leaders and pastors who are parents of children with special needs, disabilities, and extra support needs. I'm also on the board of University Covenant Nursery School, which is right here at UCC. It is a fully inclusive preschool, and it is a very, very fun gig that I have. I'm excited to talk about a talk that I've titled Room to Breathe. And Room to Breathe talks about starting and sustaining community groups for parents of children with disabilities. And now I've actually talked about this and worked on this prior to the pandemic, but during this pandemic, this topic is something I get asked about all the time, and it is a topic that has come up for so many churches and so many faith communities. How do we support those parents of children with disabilities? And the last U.S. Census in 2010, the last census we have data for, said that about 1 in 5 individuals is impacted in some way by disabilities. That's 20%. And you know, most researchers, most statisticians said the data coming out for 2020 is going to be probably closer to 1 in 4, right? 1 in 4. So many of our parents in our churches, in our faith communities, in our communities at large, right, are managing distance learning. They're managing working from home. They're managing telehealth appointments and therapies. They're managing all this, right, on top of being a parent, right, of a child with disability. Now, back in 2013, there was a study done on mothers in particular, and it showed that mothers parenting children with disabilities experience these cortisol release patterns that indicated they were undergoing ongoing and chronic stress. So ongoing and chronic stress in mothers of children with disabilities, right? And this was in 2013. This is not even like, I'm sure you check out 2020, right? And those cortisol levels are going way up, right? And studies show that individuals experiencing these chronic stress symptoms are more at risk for things like depression, anxiety, and somatic symptoms. Depression, anxiety, somatic symptoms. So there's an incredible mental health component when we talk about supporting and building communities for parents of children with disabilities and special needs. Right? And this chronic stress, right, it can be attributed to multiple things, not just a pandemic, but certainly the pandemic adds so much to this. Right? There is isolation or an inadequate support system. Again, this has been exacerbated by the pandemic. The social stigma, maybe, of a diagnosis or a behavior that comes about because of a diagnosis. There's restricted social opportunities that impact stress. And there's the child's therapeutic needs. And again, all of these things have been exacerbated by the pandemic, for sure. But they also existed far before. Right? So we want to engage in this idea of community building and shaping in our churches and faith communities. Now, here at University Covenant, we have had a group of moms that have gathered together, again, the last couple months, year, we've been meeting over Zoom. We've gathered together once a month, the third Thursday of each month, for a group that we've named Me Too. We named this about 5 years ago. We started about 5 years ago. And I actually wasn't the first person to start this group. I was approached by a friend of mine named Amy, who I work with at church here. And she said, "Hey, Bronwyn, what would you think about gathering a couple moms, you have kids with special needs together, people that we knew from the preschool, from our kids' schools, from our church. What do you think of gathering them together and having dessert and just hanging out and talking and supporting each other?" And I said, "Sure, that's great." That was 5 years ago. And that one dessert, that one hangout has turned into 5 years of meeting monthly, each and every month, with a wide range of moms. And I asked Amy a couple years ago, Amy, why did you start this? Why did you want this kind of group to exist? And she said this, and I'll put the slide up and I'll read it off here. She said, I started praying years ago that we would be able to have a group for parents who have children with special needs where they could share their stories and support each other. We wanted a space that was safe and inclusive for parents to come, that was structured and happened every month. Now, the structured part, I'm not sure why she asked me to do it, but we made it, right? So she wanted a place that was safe, inclusive, and supportive where people can share their stories. And that's what we did. By the grace of God, we've been going, like I said, for about 5 years. We have about 40-something moms who are connected with our group in some way. Not everyone comes every month. Some people engage in our Facebook groups. People come on Zooms. People come in person. We had in person. Some people connect offline, right? So it's grown quite a bit, right? So it's the idea of community building and shaping. And now, this is not a new idea. This comes, you can find it in the Bible. In Exodus chapter 17, there's a story where the Israelites, led by Joshua, were fighting in battle the Amalekites. And now Moses, in the story, Moses and Aaron and Hur go to the top of a hill. And they found that whenever Moses had his hands raised, Israel was winning. But when Moses lowered his hands, the Amalekites started making up ground. So Moses, here he was holding up his hands, but his hands got tired, right? He was holding up his hands. Right? But you can only do this for so long, right, by yourself, right? We could only hold up our hands for so long alone. Right? So Aaron, in the story, Aaron and Hur come alongside him and help him hold his hands up. So he is no longer doing this alone. And it says his hands remained steady until the sun went down, and Joshua and the army defeated the Amalekites. Right? So idea of community building and shaping. We don't have to hold up our hands alone. Right? And that's what we're doing when we build inclusive, supportive communities. Right? Gonna not knock this over. Right. So here's a couple pictures of my own community building and shaping. That's actually my friend Amy right there with my youngest daughter on her baby dedication a couple years ago. Right. So community building and shaping. So there's 4 parts. I'm sorry, there's not 4. There's 3 parts. I had 4 pictures here, but there's 3 parts to community building and shaping when we talk about building and sustaining these groups. And the first is connection. And the second is consistency. And the third is confidentiality. Right? Goes into building and shaping a community like this. Right? So we talk about connection. Right? We talk about building connection within a group of parents, children with special needs and disabilities, right? So connection, that can look like regular group meetings, whether you do it in person or on Zoom or whatever else, whatever format works for you, right? It could look like check-ins, right? Maybe you as a leader or another leader or someone else in the group, you're checking in on each other in between meetings, right? Making that connection. There's celebration, which I think often goes overlooked, especially now, right? There's celebration. Maybe you survived that IEP. Yes, go you. We're going to celebrate that in this group, right? Maybe you got through your first dentist appointment with your child with sensory processing disorder without all the screaming and the crying, and you actually got to take x-rays and all those things, right? We're going to celebrate that, right? Maybe you did another day of managing distance learning and fixing the Wi-Fi when it went down right in the middle of speech therapy, right? We're going to celebrate that, right? So connection. It's checking in, it's regular group meetings, it's celebration. All those things go to making this connection within the group. Right? The next is consistency. So consistency is location, time, and frequency. Right? You want to be consistent in those things, location, time, and frequency of the group you begin to establish. Now, at the very outset of our group, we started meeting the third Thursday of each month at 7:30 in our church library. And we have since obviously moved to Zoom. I hope to be back in person in the library in not too long when it's safe to do so. All right, so location, time, and frequency. And this is going to be different for each group and each church. Each group's going to have their own needs. Our group, it works well to meet monthly. People really like that. Some groups I know, they're structured a little differently. They might meet quarterly. They might meet bi-monthly. They might meet weekly, right? It's up to you, whatever works for you, your population, all that, right? But just keep it consistent. There was one time recently I had to move the start time from 7:30 to 8 o'clock, but I think after 5 years, we're okay with doing that. That was just one time. Okay. The third one is actually probably the most important. It's confidentiality, right? Because when you build a group like this, you want to build an open, safe, right, group where people can share their stories. And not all of our stories, right, not all of our stories have parts in them that we want to, live tweet, right, or put on Instagram, right? There's not a filter. No matter what filter we throw over that, right, it might be just a hard story. Right? And we want to build our groups that there are these places where we can be confidential and affirming of each other, right? And I know in my town where I am, the disability community is a fairly tight-knit community in some ways, and there's a lot of people who share different service providers, different teachers, and you could totally have an awesome experience with one teacher or one service provider, and maybe someone else in your group totally had a terrible experience, right? And that is okay. That is okay to have different experiences and different perspectives, because your families are different, your kids' needs are different, right? So confidentiality, it's communicating these expectations up front and frequently. Right? I should probably even do it more often now that we're on Zoom. The format's a little different, right? Communicating the expectations about confidentiality and promoting that respectful discussion, right? Even when we're talking about really, really hard things. And affirming vulnerability, saying, thank you for sharing that. I know that is hard. Right? There are times in our group where people say, you know what, I have never told somebody this, but, right? Or I'm struggling with whatever it is. I'd really like some encouragement, right? We want to create those spaces in the communities that we build. Right? So that's what it could look like. So now the question is, who's going to lead one of these groups? So maybe you're sitting there saying, yes, our church could totally create a group and support parents of children with special needs. We could do it on Zoom. We could do it in person, whatever your jurisdiction allows at this point, right? But who is going to lead? So I challenge you to think about this. Think about what are the leadership qualifications you would use for other small groups in your organization? Right? What kinds of leaders do you generally recruit? You also probably want to recruit more than one leader. Now, our group, we have two of us who lead, myself and Amy. There are some months where I'm like, whoo, that third Thursday of the month comes, and I'm like, man, I am tapped out. Like, this day, this week, this month, this year sucked the life out of me. Could you help facilitate, right? And that certainly goes both directions, right? We know that we have each other. If something comes up in the group, I'm not really sure how to handle this with this person, or whatever, right? To have that second leader to avoid burnout. And you're going to want to find someone who's connected with a disability community in some way. Now, this doesn't have to be a person with a PhD, an MD, an NFT, an LCSW, any other alphabet soup you want, right? It doesn't have to be someone with those kind of credentials, but it does have to be someone who is passionate about building supportive community. Right? I don't have any fanciful letters after my name, yet, here we are, right? So think about what qualifications do you normally use for small groups? Like, what kinds of leaders are you looking for, and what kind of character do they have, right? You want those people who are going to be able to build that community. Right? So who is going to lead, right? Say you have a leader. Now you got to go out, find people to join your group, right? Now, for us, we have our church right here, and like I said, we have an on-site inclusive preschool. So in the outset, 5 years ago, many of our moms that joined were connected to that preschool. right? And we also have a children and youth ministry department. So we started, parents started hearing about our group and from our church and started coming. And eventually, word made its way out into the greater community where I live, and to our local schools, where I go drop off, pick up my kids, do all the things, do Boy Scouts, do, coaching football, whatever. Right? And our local regional service providers, I'd go take my kiddos to speech therapy or occupational therapy, physical therapy, all the therapies. I'd meet other parents there and say, hey, we have a group. Why don't you come? Right? And then other folks in the group, they'd come for a couple months and then invite a friend. Say, hey, why don't you come with me? Why don't you come with me to meet a group of folks who understand what this is like? Right? I would say more than half of the individuals that are associated with our group now do not attend our church, and many do not attend any church at all. Right? So it definitely is a need in the community. I'm sure is a need in your community as well, especially as this pandemic rolls on. Right? Okay, so you have your leader. You have your group members. Now what do you do? Right? So the way your group is structured, it really is going to depend on the needs of your group, kind of the resources you have available, right? What people want to talk about, kind of all those things, right? How much structure they want. I tend to go on the side of not very structured, and I'll explain that a little bit. There is a model, which I have dubbed the Facilitator-Led Model, and we'll put a slide up there. So this is kind of when the facilitator chooses a topic ahead of time. They communicate that topic to the group, and the group arrives and knows, okay, we're going to talk about IEPs, we're going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. Talk about anxiety, whatever we're talking about, self-care. And the group discusses that topic. So it's like predetermined. Hey, it's January, we're talking about self-care. It's December, we're talking about anxiety, whatever. Right? Facilitator-led model. Our group, me too, we tend to go toward what I call the participant-led model, where the topic's not pre-established, and the group discussion happens, and the facilitators, we kind of facilitate out of that natural conversational flow. Sometimes I'll begin with a question or a prompt, or sometimes someone else will bring something, and we've been going for, like I said, a couple years now, so we have some, people who know each other, outside of the group and can catch up with each other, and a prompt or a question comes up out of that, right? I like it this way. I tend to go toward the not structured, but I like it this way. And there's another model. I didn't have this in the original presentation that I did a few years ago, but I've added it since. And I call it the Bible study structure model, because as we've been going, and especially through this pandemic, some people said, hey, we have a Bible study, right, we're forming of parents of children with special needs. We have a study, how could we do that, right? So you might meet weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, and you could do it one of two ways. You could have your curriculum, right? You could have your curriculum, and you could say, hey, the first 40 minutes, we're going to talk about the curriculum. And the last 20 minutes, or however long you go, is going to be, prayer, care, share, right? Sharing. We're going to talk about, what's going on, right? Where we can support each other and encourage each other. Or you can say, we're going to do curriculum for the first 3 weeks, and the fourth week of every month, we just do encouragement, sharing, caring for each other. Right? You could do it that way, right? There's some great curriculum out there for groups like this. There's tons out there. You can Google it. You can look at the resources page. There's tons of authors that are speaking alongside this conference. A good one, Jolene Philo, has the 5 love languages in special needs families. That's a great one. Diane Kim has Unbroken Faith. That's a fantastic one. Lisa Jameson has a couple. There are tons of authors right here at this conference that you can tap into if you want to go to the curriculum model, kind of the Bible study structure model. You could do that, right? So there's all kinds of different ways, and it's going to look different in whatever context you're in, right? And I used to spend a lot of time at the beginning of this talk talking about why do we need this, right? Like, the cortisol levels, depression, anxiety. I used to spend a lot more time talking about that, but I think the pandemic has really highlighted, right? Really highlighted this kind of chronic stress and this deep need that people have for connection and relationship within a supportive community, right? And it is up to us as leaders in faith communities to help build and shape that inclusive community where, as my friend Amy said, you can share your stories in a supportive environment, right? So a while ago, I asked a friend of mine who comes very regularly to our group, I said, why do you come? Like, what keeps you coming? Like, you could do anything else you wanted every third Thursday of the month. You could go on a run. You could go on a bike ride. I live in a very bike-friendly town. You could binge Netflix, right? You could go to the grocery store alone. You go to Target alone, right? You could fall asleep. You could do anything you want. Why do you come? And she said this about our group. She said, it's the resource I think of first when I need to do some type of problem-solving research related to autism. It's the place where empathy can be felt in another mother's eyes, and you just know they understand. We can cry together, and we could laugh together. Yes, we do, my friend. I like that. And you just know they understand. That's why we called our group Me Too, 5 years ago, right? Because sometimes the best thing that could happen to you as a parent in that moment of like, this is really hard for me, right? I'm experiencing this. This is so hard. For another parent to come alongside you and say, me too, I understand. And that's what we're doing when we're building these supportive communities. Right? So think about, we'll give a couple discussion questions for those of you doing groups. But if you're listening to this by yourself, think about, on a scale of 1 to 5, how possible is it for you to begin this kind of group at your church? What challenges might you anticipate, and what kind of resources can you use to start? Right? If you need help beginning the group or sustaining a group or just want to talk it through, you could always email me. My email's up there, bronwyn@ucov.com, BRONWYN @ucov.com. I'd love to talk to you. All right, thank you so much.